Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Review. Now, I'm sure you're aware that for the past few weeks, we have been celebrating Will Smith Month. My roommates have hung up the Will Smith banners, we cut the Will Smith cake, we say our woos and whats before every meal, and at night we pass around the goodnight kissing picture. Give me that.
This isn't mine.
Every time. Anyway, did you know that Will Smith starred in a vampire film? I am, of course, talking about the 2007 movie based off Richard Matheson's classic novel, the Francis Lawrence film, I Am Legend. But Maven, you may be saying, those weren't vampires. The Darkseekers were mutated humans that were much more like zombies in the style of Resident Evil or 28 Days Later. And you wouldn't be wrong. So you may be thinking, where do I get off using this movie for my gimmicky little web show about the changing nature of vampires in pop culture when it clearly belongs on a show about zombie reviews? Well, first of all, I ought to point out that vampires and zombies aren't all that different. They're both immortal undead creatures that ravenously consume humans. In a way, you could say that vampires are like zombies on a liquid diet. Still not convinced? Well, let me ask you this. Where would you pinpoint the start of the zombie pop culture phenomenon? That's right. George Romero's 1968 Night of the Living Dead. Well, do you know what literary masterpiece directly inspired Romero's creation of the Living Dead in that film? Yes, it was Matheson's 1954 I Am Legend. No lie, look it up. Romero proudly admits it. Yes, vampires did it first. Next time you get into a vampires versus zombies debate, just remember that we wouldn't have zombies as we do today if it hadn't been for a vampire book. And unlike the 2007 movie, in the 1954 novel, they were unmistakably vampires. Even though they're slow and lumbering and easy to push away, they were genuine, allergic to garlic, afraid of mirrors, can't function in daylight, bullets won't stop them, I want to suck your blood, kill them with a stake through the heart, vampires. And so I hardly need any more excuse to sink my teeth into this Will Smith movie. Right, vampires. This movie was actually the third time I Am Legend was adapted for film, making it the second most adapted vampire novel ever. In 1971, we had The Omega Man, a much looser interpretation starring the Chuck Norris of his day, Charlton fucking Heston. But back in 1964, we had The Last Man on Earth, which stuck the closest to the source material and starred Vincent Price, for once not playing a spooky villain. Or was he? But we'll get to that later. I Am Legend, as we see in The Last Man on Earth, brought us one of literature's first instances of sci-fi vampires. Here, we have vampires that were the result of a disease and not supernatural. A mysterious bacterial plague has blown in on the wind, and everyone except our immune protagonist, Robert Neville, falls victim to it and dies, only to return from the dead as a zombie-like vampire. The story follows Robert as he goes about his day-to-day life, keeping his home fortified, disposing of the bodies of the weak vampires that get consumed by the stronger ones, and systematically going door to door and staking every vampire he finds in his hometown. At night, he holds up in his house and tries to distract himself while the vampires beat at the walls of his home, taunting and threatening him until sunrise. Then he starts it all over again.
I can't afford the luxury of anger. Anger can make me vulnerable.
Throughout the whole first half of the book and movie, all we have is Robert internal monologuing to himself and going about tasks that, to him, have become dull and repetitive. But despite how this may seem like a boring concept to us now, you have to remember that back then, this was one of the very first times we saw a post-apocalyptic scenario of this nature. It was still new and innovative. And the shock and horror of how one man could survive while surrounded by an entire world filled with monstrous creatures was enough to keep an audience engaged in his survival. People could easily identify with his character simply because he was human, and therefore the audience's only link into this story. That's not to say that Vincent Price doesn't provide a compelling performance, but the story sort of had a free pass with this one. By the time 2007 rolled around, we had seen this kind of movie dozens and dozens of times, and man versus world of zombies had become cliché. Night of the Living Dead style zombie swarms just weren't scary anymore, and don't really make for a very exciting action movie. So the filmmakers were tasked with finding a way to make I Am Legend engaging for a modern audience. They did this in several ways. First of all, as I've mentioned, they upped the horror stakes by changing the old-fashioned, slow-lumbering vampires into trendy, fast and violent mutant zombie sort as popularized by video games. Secondly, they followed in the footsteps of the Omega Man by giving our hero more high-tech weapons and car chase scenes. Thirdly, they jumped on the coattails of the morality frying pan that is the man is his own worst enemy fad by changing the plague from mysteriously caused by nature to a virus created by humans. And fourthly, and most importantly, they got the most bankable, charming, identifiable, charismatic, universally beloved actor to carry the one-man show that is the first half of the movie. Will Smith. Now, this bit of brilliance didn't happen overnight. The studio went through considering Tom Cruise, Michael Douglas, Mel Gibson, Nicolas Cage, and Arnold Schwarzenegger before finally choosing Big Willie for the part. Originally, he was going to work with Michael Bay to make this movie happen, but then they decided to make Bad Boys 2, and thankfully the project was shelved for the 67th time until they managed to lower the budget and Francis Lawrence signed on to direct. At the time, Will Smith considered this his most challenging acting role. He was tasked to sustain the entire first half of the movie on his own. To prep for the part, he did research on solitary confinement patients and watched Castaway 42 times. And he delivers an intense and moving performance. So let's take a look at why this works. Even though Will is playing an uncharacteristically serious and troubled part, he does not do it without his beloved brand of quirky humor.
Listen, if you're planning a party or something, just tell me now, okay? Because, I don't like surprises, and I swear I'll act surprised, okay?
And it's this aspect of his charm that makes the audience like him, despite the fact that we might normally find a character who hinged on the edge of sanity uncomfortable to watch and less than identifiable. For one thing, this film gives him a pet dog to talk to.
Yeah, that's what you want.
So, instead of internal monologue narrating away like the exposition fairy in a way that might bore us, or him talking to himself or inanimate objects in a way that might alienate us, he has a Disney sidekick-style furry friend to play off of in a way that follows in the footsteps of Will's usual buddy comedy dynamic of his previous films. True, the dog doesn't talk back, but I think we're all grateful for that.
I just walked in to find you here with that sad look upon your face.
He talks to himself and to mannequins, but mostly to the dog, so we don't really feel he's crazy. When Charlton Heston talks to his mannequin, we're not sure what to think. Is he wacko or is he just fooling around? And do we give a crap? Heston's an engaging actor, but he's not set up early enough as likable or sympathetic because the Omega Man is trying too hard to make him look badass. Instead of really playing a tortured, lonely soul, he's much more, "Get your hands off me, you damn dirty vampire," so it falls flat. Will Smith instead makes his classic cheesy jokes, sets up mannequins to pretend to talk to in a way that's more like a dorky game than the dark humor in Omega Man, and he treats his pet like a person, which many people can relate to. We watch him hunt deer, he's obviously hungry, but when his deer is stolen by lions, we see him give up and let them have it when he realizes that they have cubs to feed. So we learn that he's compassionate. We feel for him during the flashbacks of his family, and we admire his passion to stay behind to try to find a cure, doing what's right and noble when he could have run and hid.
I can still fix this.
Please.
This is ground zero. This is my site. We talked about this.
What are you doing?
What am I doing? I'm not gonna let this happen.
He laughs, he cries, he curls up in fear. He's strong when it matters, but soft and vulnerable at the same time. The audience can't resist growing to care about him, and so we're invested as we just watch him roll around town trying to get by. True, this interpretation of the character takes huge liberties with the original Neville as written, but they were necessary changes to make this story work in the modern era. Imagine Arnold in this role like the studio once conceived. He would have been much more like Charlton Heston, and we would not have cared. Movies like Predator and Castaway give us time to get to know the hero before he's isolated. I Am Legend starts with him alone and needs a charismatic personality to win us over from the very first scene. Will has to be our sympathetic hero and our comic relief to cope with this dark, terrifying subject. And personally, I can't think of any other movie star who could have pulled it off as well.
I'm getting good.
But part of me has to wonder, is he too likable? In this film, we see a processed and packaged Neville, impossible to fail to win our hearts. Is this movie cheating? The novel didn't require any such manipulations or over-demonstrations of his nobility and good guyness to make him identifiable. Even though Vincent Price doesn't quite have Will Smith's charm, watching him in Last Man, his pathos impressed me considering he's most remembered for playing villains. In both movies, we only get to know a little bit of Robert's wife and daughter through a few brief flashbacks. But in Last Man, when they die and Virginia comes back for him, it's terrifying. Realizing that he then has to take out his own wife as a vampire and rebury her is traumatizing. Will Smith's wife and daughter die off screen, which is powerful, but we feel much more for him when he has to put down his own dog, who we've had half the movie to grow to care about. When Vincent Price's dog dies, it's used as a foreshadowing metaphor about the futileness of his struggle, and though sad, the manipulation on the audience's heartstrings isn't as blatant. But I suppose it's not the character's fault that modern audiences have become so desensitized to the cliche horror apocalypse that we need our protagonist to be a martyr in order to connect with him. Even though I think Will Smith has enough charm to make him likable, even if his Neville had been more morally gray, I do understand why they overcompensated by pushing the limit with the goodness characterization. And fortunately, for the first half of the movie, it works. But when a studio stresses too much about pleasing their audience, we also unfortunately end up with travesties like the second half of the movie. After the tragic, heartbreaking, sanity-snapping death of his dog. Oh, Will, you need a hug.
Friend. I told you. This Will Smith is mine. My turn. Mine.
Anyway, after his dog dies, Neville meets other survivors of the plague, Anna and Ethan. These characters are new to this version. In the book and Last Man, he meets Ruth, who he at first thinks is a survivor, but turns out she's one of the vampires who's part of a new society that's been sent to him as a spy. Her character is a lot more in line with the female Darkseeker that Will Smith captures and experiments on, but instead of us getting to see his interactions with her, Anna and Ethan enter the movie to act as foils for Smith's Neville. They're innocent and optimistic and speak of the will of God and a Zion-esque land where humans survive, and all of this is added just so that Will Smith can respond like this.
God didn't do this, Anna. We did.
Well, in the original story, God did do it.
There is no God. There is no God.
Why? Because blaming man for all of man's woes is deep, man. Pfft, fate and nature's will, that's weak. Who needs that? The real evil is man.
Man. Yes, man. The persecutor of innocent vampires for centuries.
Stop that.
Well, fuck you then.
Anyway, just man. And Neville, who is sacrificing himself to try to find a cure to save man from himself, is Christ? Now, we can't entirely blame the 2007 movie for this religious allegory shoehorning. The Omega Man did it first. In the end, Neville sends Anna and Ethan off to safety as he gives his own life to blow up all the Darkseekers that have broken into his laboratory. Anna drives off to the Garden of Eden with Neville's serum, and the human race supposedly will now live somehow happily ever after, wiser and peaceful, after learning the error of their presumptuous attempting to screw with nature by curing cancer ways.
Dr. Robert Neville dedicated his life to the discovery of a cure and the restoration of humanity. He gave his life to defend it. We are his legacy. This is his legend.
Okay, most of you have probably heard that this film has an alternate ending. When the studio test screened this film, the audience didn't like the original ending, so they went back and changed it to the Pseudo-Jesus Explosion Fest. Let's look at what they scrapped. The original ending begins the same way, with the Darkseekers breaking into Neville's lab and trapping them there. But as they attack, Neville realizes that they're not there because they want to eat him like mindless animals. The reason they're there is to rescue the female he had kidnapped and was doing experiments on. He gives her back to them, and they leave him alone. The leader of the pack clearly cares about his lady friend and wants to rescue her from the crazy doctor who's doing evil experiments on her. Neville understands this and then is mortified to realize that these creatures cared about every single one of their friends he'd kidnapped and killed with his experiments. They have feelings and a social structure. Even though he was trying to help him, they don't give a crap about his cure. They just want to live unmolested with their loved ones. Neville realizes that he has become a legend among them as the terrifying monster that hunts them down to experiment and kill them. For all his good intentions to try to help them, he's only been hurting them all along. This blows his mind and shatters his world, and he leaves New York, defeated, to finally try to start his own life over and make some kind of meaning out of the world that's left to him. Yeah, it's dark and troubling, and that's why the test audience didn't like it, but it's the whole point of the story. It's the title, for God's sake. He's a legend because he's the terror that comes while you sleep. It's supposed to make you think about who is the monster and who is the man, etc., etc. Evil is a point of view. It's supposed to leave you shaken and a little bit sick. Not very bankable for a Hollywood action movie, though, so yeah. Maybe it just should have never been made again. And as dark and unliked as it was, this original ending was still watered down from the novel. They were still going overboard to try to make Will Smith likable by stripping him of the negative traits of the Neville of the book, by making his intentions more noble and sacrificial.
Let me save you! Let me save you!
In the book, he's looking for a cure, yes, but more like a hobby out of boredom than to save the world or rectify man's wrongs. He's resigned to being alone, and instead of just kidnapping a few test subjects for the sake of the greater good, he spends his days going door to door, slaughtering the vampires where they sleep. He is actively murdering them left and right. And when he finds out at the end of the story that they were more than mindless monsters or reanimated corpses, that the people he was killing still had feelings and consciousness and formed a society where they had adapted and coped to their new state, he realizes that he truly has become what he thought he was fighting against all along, and that they are all innocents.
They were afraid. They didn't know.
True, he didn't know, but in his case, it's pure ignorance without any sort of noble cause behind it, like the 2007 movie gives Will Smith. Matheson wrote Neville to be so much more monstrous in his causeless killing, like an animal might do for survival, and that is why he is legend. Matheson's book was groundbreaking because it used vampires as a literary metaphor to make you re-examine your worldview, not just as scary monsters for a good guy to defeat. We still see most of this in The Last Man on Earth, but it's lost entirely in Omega Man and in the altered ending to the 2007 movie. In the 2007 movie, instead, the prominent metaphor used is the butterfly. Neville's daughter talks about a butterfly at the beginning of the movie, and we see it come back several times. The butterfly is a symbol of metamorphosis, and it's supposed to represent how we're to realize at the end of the film that the Darkseekers are metamorphosed humans. They aren't monsters, merely a new breed, the next step in mankind's existence, evolved, not degenerates, and beautiful in their own way. They have a society and feelings and intelligence just as we do, but different. It may seem like they're going backwards in evolution at first look, but are they? They're faster, stronger, and adapted to survival in a ruined world. They are the fittest. Unlike all the humans who the virus outright killed, they have a true place in this new world. And movie, if you blow them all up at the end and have humans get cured and survive and start over again, you've completely stomped all over this delicate metaphor that you spent so much time building up from the beginning of the film. What's the point now? Movie, you could have been remembered for bringing Matheson's morality-rocking message to a new generation, reeling people in with the promise of another 28 days later and then delivering a hard slap of perspective. Instead, you tried to please the lowest common Hollywood audience denominator by ending things with an explosion, and still nobody liked you. Every single person I've talked to about this movie said something along the lines of, it started off good, but then it just fell apart halfway through and then turned to crap at the end, but it sure was sad when Will Smith's dog died. Ah, Will Smith. Perhaps you'll do another vampire movie someday, but for now, the only one you have under your belt is one where vampires were stripped of their literary meaning for the sake of box office appeal that failed. But it's okay. We still love you.
Oh, hell no!
I am the Maven of the Eventide, and I better go before it's Shark Tale o'clock again.
What? Big Will.
Well, fuck you then! Bitch.
Knock your punk ass down.